Section 7, there we go. So Section 7, right, someone asked this question, what problems, remember Section 7 is on Rome, what problems occurred because of debt? Why weren't those problems immediately resolved? How did the plebeians finally force a solution? What does this tell us about the Roman Republic? And one thing I want you to understand is that there's a difference between the early Roman Republic and the later Roman Republic, right? There's a difference between the early Roman Republic and the later Roman Republic. So we talked about this problem of debt. Remember, there's the patricians who are the elites. They're the plebeians who are everyone else other than the slaves. The slaves are really on the bottom. The plebeians are often in debt. Oftentimes this is not their fault. Remember I gave you the story of the soldier who appeared in the forum, the kind of center of Rome, and the guy was, dirty and hadn't been able to get clean, and he was starving, and he'd clearly been beaten, and he had all these battle scars. Remember, that soldier had lost his farm because he was out fighting for Rome, and while he was out fighting, some invaders came in, destroyed his farm. When he went back, the government, instead of saying, oh, let's help you rebuild your farm, the government said, you have to pay us taxes. And so he borrowed money to pay the taxes, and then he was not able to get his farm going again, so he lost his farm. He couldn't pay back his debt, and so he was beaten. So that's a serious problem, and this was happening, maybe not exactly as strong as that, but this was a serious problem that's affecting many plebeians. So the plebeians wanted to get debt relief. The Senate was made up of patricians, the people who were owed money. So they said, no, we don't want to give you debt relief because that would mean you're not going to pay us back. So they refused. Then while this debate, this conflict was going on, Rome was invaded by a foreign army. Right? Rome was invaded by a foreign army. And remember, the plebeians formed the bulk of the army. And the plebeians are patriotic, so they'll go out and fight the foreigners. And the Senate says, great, when you come back, we'll deal with that debt thing, we promise. They come back and they don't deal with the debt thing. And this happens like twice more, where the plebeians are trying to get the Senate to give them debt relief. The Senate refuses, then Rome is invaded, and the plebeians go off patriotically and fight. Finally, the plebeians engage in what's called the secession of the plebs. Plebeian is the same thing. The Senate says, oh, there's another foreign invader. I guess we can't talk about debt relief. And the plebeians say, fine, we're seceding. We're leaving Rome. And the plebeians leave the city. And they go to the sacred mountain outside of Rome. And now no one's defending the city. Remember, the plebeians form the bulk of the army. So the Senate finally has to agree to help them. This isn't pretty. This is conflict. But the key thing is the democracy does eventually work. And the solution, in a sense, is to expand the democracy because the Senate agrees to an institutional change, the appointment of tribunes of the plebs, plebeian tribunes. A tribune is an official, right? A tribune is an official. And now you're going to have plebeian officials who are elected by the plebs through their own assembly. And these guys can pass laws on the plebs, on the plebeians, later propose laws for everyone. And remember, these tribunes were sacrosanct. You weren't allowed to touch them. If you were to punch a tribune, you could be executed by anyone on the spot. And these tribunes had the power to intercede in political processes and in judgments against plebeians with their power of veto, which literally means I forbid. So I gave you the example. Remember, you have a plebeian who, through no fault of their own, is in debt, is not able to pay their debt, and then someone's trying to take their farm. Judge says, okay, you owe the money, you got to give up your farm. The tribune shows up and says, no, I veto that judgment. You're not taking that man's farm. That is wrong. That is unjust. So democracy is expanded, right, to help these plebeians. So what problems occur because of debt? These plebeians are just suffering a lot, right? Gave you the example. Why weren't those problems immediately resolved? The Senate, the patricians, didn't want to pay the money back, or they didn't want to give debt relief because it meant they wouldn't get their money back. Right? The patricians who were in the Senate didn't want to help the plebeians because it would mean the plebeians wouldn't have to pay them back. How did the plebeians finally force a solution? They left. They just left Rome and left it undefended. And then finally the Senate says, okay, we'll make a compromise so you guys will come back and defend the city. This tells us that the early Roman Republic was willing to compromise. Right? They were willing to compromise. It wasn't pretty, but they were willing to compromise. Now we have this other question, what problems existed regarding law? What were the law of the 12 tables? What led to their promulgation? What does this tell us about the Roman Republic? Right? So, remember, Roman law was an oral custom, and I always give you the example of that kid who you play games with who changes the rules as they go along. Right? You're playing tag, and they say, no tag backs as soon as you try and tag them. You're getting ready to tag them, and they touch something, they say, oh, I'm on base. That's kind of how Roman law worked. Roman law was an oral custom that had been interpreted by the upper classes. That was often used for the advantage of the upper classes, especially in regards to debt. The plebeians weren't happy with this, and so they seceded again. They said, we're not going to defend the city, you guys can take care of it. And so the government agreed, the Senate agreed, to codify and make laws public knowledge. So when it says 12 tables, they literally wrote on like these table-sized pieces of stone the laws, so that everyone could go look at the law and know what the law was. Right? That's the law of the 12 tables, making it clear what the laws were. Right? This helps the plebs, especially it lets them know their rights when it comes to issues of debt. So again, the elites allowed change. The elites were willing to compromise. That brought stability, and that allowed conquest. Only when you have a stable society are you able to go out and expand and conquer. What was the Fabian strategy? So basically, remember the Romans in the Punic Wars were against this guy Hannibal, who they just could not defeat. Remember, he defeated them utterly at the Battle of Cannae. The Fabian strategy, which is this guy right here, that's Hannibal over there, having conquered the Roman. He has the Roman standard. He's holding it upside down as an insult. Fabian strategy was, don't fight Hannibal. Eventually, he'll get tired and leave. That was the Roman strategy. The key point why I wanted you to understand was just in what trouble the Romans were in. Right? Just how difficult their situation was in when they're saying, we can't beat this guy. Let's just try to avoid him and hope he goes away. No one had any questions here? Okay, what were the characteristics of Roman family life? What were the characteristics of infanticide and gender? So remember, Roman family life, the patriarch was in charge. The oldest male in the family was in charge. This person had literally life and death power over much of the family. And I tried to emphasize that you can see this in particular through the practice of abandonment and infanticide. So Roman ideal was to have 2 boys and 1 girl. Right? The Roman family ideal was 2 boys and 1 girl. Now, a lot of times Americans say we want 1 boy and 1 girl. In Rome, there was a good chance of one of your children would die, so you wanted to spare a boy. I mean, I'm not trying to be crude, but that was the idea. You know, one of your kids may die, you want to have an extra boy. In Roman law, a woman left her home and joined someone else's home. And also she had to take money with her. She had to take property with her when she left the home. So every girl you have is money leaving your house because you have to pay money to raise her, and she takes money with her when she leaves. Every boy you have, you are making money because he brings in a woman who brings property with her. So the problem, and so you may say, okay, well that's not so good. And what it leads to then was the abandonment of baby girls or even actual infanticide. Right? Sometimes people would abandon baby girls in hopes that someone else would pick them up. A lot of times animals got to them first or they just died of exposure. Other times they just straight out killed the girls. That was in the power of the patriarch. And I gave you that example that there was a letter by a Roman man to his wife, and it was a very loving letter. He was very concerned because she was pregnant, so he's like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Be careful. But he says, matter of factly, if you give birth to a boy, keep the child. If you give birth to a girl, expose her, meaning abandon her outside. This causes problems later on, of course, because they don't have enough girls. And Christians and Jews don't do this. So in particular, what's going to happen later is lots of pagan men will marry Christian women, and that will help lead to the expansion of Christianity. And you can also see why maybe this would have been more attractive to someone like Perpetua or any woman, why they may be interested in Christianity, because it expressly forbid this practice.